Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm joined by Lawrence Connolly for the Axon Bulletin. Now, if you're wondering where the third contributor is, who is normally here on a Tuesday, Natasha may be joining us at some point during the show. She is otherwise engaged at the moment. Lawrence Connolly, welcome back. How are you?
As well, I am, mate. I hope you're well too.
Yes, I am. I'm very well, because it seems as though progress is being made in world events, but not necessarily out of Celtic Park, unfortunately. Having a wee look at the kind of lack of movement, Lawrence, and I know that sometimes you think, well, no news is good news, but under the circumstances, 62 days managerless. I know that John Kennedy's in there as an interim, and Dominic Mackay has been at Celtic Park for 8 days. If you want to have a quick look through the Celtic official channels news sections, we're being reminded that the Celtic stores are reopening in Scotland. We're being reminded of the Player of the Year. You have to vote now for the 2021 Player of the Year. That's a serious vote. The number 7 restaurant is now taking bookings. And of course, there is mention of the tremendous result from the women's team the other day. But no update on anything else. No communication, no engagement. Has anything changed, or does everything remain the same here, Lawrence?
I think that's the problem. There's no acknowledgement that they're even looking for a manager at times. You could set out a timescale saying, look, we're currently looking for a manager, it's progressing well, we're down to the final stages, and we don't expect appointment to be made until the summer. Holding statement, nice and easy to set people's expectations. If we appoint before the summer, everybody's happy. If we don't, well, they've given us a timeline that we can follow. But to get nothing on it is pretty poor, isn't it? I think we've said before, just look at Aberdeen, they kind of gave holding statements and updates to their fans. We had a few issues during the season, and we're just not getting anything. But like you said, Celtic stores are open, spend your money.
Yeah, as are the restaurants. We're now taking bookings. And by the way, it's just a simple form of communication. Communicate with these fans who are sitting at home watching virtual games. Not only that, but paying over and above that for the likes of Premier Sports, Sky Sports, BT Sports and various other club channels, Lawrence. And all the while basically being ignored as a fan base. And I just feel that, nothing seems to have changed so far. And even if it was a communication of some kind of description, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and that, I think the opportunity for that was last week with the arrival of Dominic Mackay. Yes, I know he's not in post as such, but it's quite clear that he's working hand in glove with others at the club to try and oversee the rebuild and the recruitment of a number of staff. We will be talking about that, because obviously it's a huge rebuild that we're going to be facing in the summer. But we'll start off with the manager. We'll start off with why is the Eddie Howe deal stalling? Well, over the piece, Lawrence, everybody on Axon said their own opinions on who should be pursued, who should never be even in the conversation. And I think that Eddie Howe, across the board, I'm not going to say universally, because no one pleases everyone all the time. You can't please all the people all the time. However, I think Eddie Howe has been the most popular choice amongst the Celtic support. Is it safe to say that, Lawrence?
Yeah, least controversial. I've not heard anyone say no way, no chance on him, whereas some other people that have been popular have had that kind of adverse reaction as well. I've not seen any adverse comment on Howe yet. So why is it stalling? Who knows? Recruitment takes a while, but it's down to Celtic really to lay out a plan and say, as you said, Mackay walks in. We have the introduction to Mackay. Our next step is the head of football, and the next step after that will be manager. Here's the timescales where we expect to meet these announcements. they're not leaking any information that no one knows. We know we're in the market for a manager and someone to run the football side of the business for us. It's just setting expectations rather than it's almost a vacuum, isn't it?
It is, Lawrence. The big thing as well, though, right, is I've got to take on board the fact that it's a particularly difficult scenario in the here and now for those at Celtic, because you've got the prime candidate, and I think everybody knows Eddie Howe's the prime candidate for the Celtic job. However, there are intricacies in that deal, in that Eddie Howe wants to bring his own team. Now, all season we have criticised Celtic for not giving Neil Lennon his own team, and I'm just talking his coaching team. And obviously there's a much wider team when it comes to Eddie Howe, and I think that just goes hand in hand with managing in the Premiership in England. Sometimes your backroom team could be 8 to 17. I've heard as much as 17, to the point where when you're going to a game, pre-COVID this is, Lawrence, where you normally could have travelled in one coach, there's another coach just for the staff. There's so many staff, and that's everybody from the dietitians right through to the analysis, the game analysis, as well as the coaches and everything else in between. So we get all that, and I think that if we go for Eddie Howe, we're also saying, well, we need to make that investment not only in Eddie Howe but in all these other staff members. And there's an issue in that when a number of those staff members are currently employed by Bournemouth, who are chasing promotion, and then you've got an issue, well, they're chasing the playoffs rather, you've got an issue in that they're maybe looking at, if we win in the playoffs and we get into the EPL, then obviously they're in line for bonuses, etc., and that muddies the waters somewhat. So is there a degree of sympathy in relation to this, as well as just saying get the deal done?
No, because I think you're mixing two things up there. So there's a structure, and then there's individuals. So what we should be doing is agreeing a structure and then look at individuals to fill those positions. So if Eddie Howe has said I need 10 people, and it wouldn't be one extra coach for Celtic, that would be 6 extra coaches, I think, under the Scottish Government reassessment of the rules. So the structure is what we need to agree with Howe, because there's no guarantee that these people, as you say, if they're employed, will want to leave. There's other things going on. So it's really agreeing the structure, first of all, I think. Once you've got that in place, it's then targeting the personnel. So, if Eddie Howe can't get his dietitian to come, or his preferred dietitian to come, does that mean the deal's off? If Celtic's agreed they can have a dietitian and he's going to be involved in the hiring of it. So I think it's two separate things. We should get the structure announced or agreed on what we're looking for, and then the personnel should follow that.
When you're looking at the outpouring on a daily basis from Celtic supporters like ourselves, Lawrence, and obviously trying to turn the screw on this one and constantly being fed nothing from the club, absolutely nothing. You then start looking at the what if scenarios of when do we move on? When do we move on from Eddie Howe? Because it is a situation where, and we'll get into some of the restructuring and the rebuilding of the club, but there was a story dropped the other week there. And the story was in relation to Mourinho. And when I seen that, initially I thought to myself, I think it's been dropped in there to apply pressure on the number one candidate, because I don't think Celtic would see Mourinho, and I don't think Mourinho would see Celtic as something that they would want to pursue, Lawrence. So I think, there was maybe a wee bit of chicanery there, dropping in a name to try and speed up the process.
If Mourinho doesn't see Celtic as a possible destination and Celtic doesn't see Mourinho as a possible manager, you'd think anyone within the game, if that's true, would know that to be true. So it wouldn't apply any pressure at all then. Because if it's that absurd an idea, the guy's going to go, well, that's never going to happen. So I wouldn't see any pressure get applied there at all. And, never say never. Trapattoni was never going to manage Ireland, was he? It's kind of... Who knows? And if Celtic haven't asked the question of Mourinho, it's kind of, why not? It's one of those ones. He's one of the best managers in world football. He's suddenly become available. Why wouldn't you sound them out?
Would you? I know. Now, before I came on, Lawrence, I had a wee discussion about that, because when you look at his CV and you look at the clubs that he's managed, you look at the successes he has had in his managerial career, you think that's a no-brainer, and then people laugh at you even if you try and link him to Celtic because they think you'd never get him. But realistically, would you go for him? Because I'm basically looking at one simple fact about Mourinho, and it's that he's never managed at any one club for more than 3 years. So I just think it would be short-termism, and I don't think that's where we are at the moment as a football club.
So I wouldn't take that short-termism. Strachan says 3 years of kind of shelf life as a manager at a club like Celtic. If that's the plan, we need to have a long-term plan, and whether that needs to get rotated, like some people say, the board members should be cleared out in the non-exec every 5 years. They should be staying on longer than that because it leads to complacency within a board. Perhaps that's what we've suffered from. So if it is, the structure is that managers at that level look to move on every 3 years, is there something wrong with that? Would we get Mourinho? I seem to remember you telling me a story about when you heard the Brendan Rodgers rumour. You were laughed out of town when you told people
I was.
You'll never get Brendan Rodgers. So
yeah.
It's kind of, and how long would Brendan really stay at a club? And he moved on, and obviously we didn't enjoy the way he moved and taking everyone with him, bar John Kennedy. But we got £9 million that kind of softened the blow a bit. And I suppose if that was more managing, your expectation was to do that after 3 years, at least you can be a bit better prepared for it.
You brought him up, so I'm going to run with it, Lawrence. You brought up Brendan Rodgers, you brought up the £9 million. My biggest issue with that is we didn't invest it in another management structure. We didn't go out and get a manager and a managerial backroom team of a similar standard, of a £9 million standard. That was my biggest issue with that.
Yeah, but we've got disco lights, and Russell's got somewhere to wear that jacket to now with the disco lights in place. It's what do you really want more than disco lights?
Well, the thing with the jacket, if anyone didn't tune into the women's coverage, the Celtic women's coverage that Lawrence and I were both involved in the other day, great result against Hibs, Lawrence, I'm not just saying it to be politically correct. I really enjoy the game. We're going to continue covering the games as well whenever they're live on BBC Alba. But Fran Alonso turned up in some get-up. It was a red sweater with a white blazer. And upon winning the game 3-1, Russell was able to go into his wardrobe and pull out a white blazer, which really impressed me. Of the 5 people involved, I didn't think it would have been Russell, but yeah, he did it. So I'm not quite sure where the blazer came from. But Fran Alonso is doing a cracking job. But on the subject of Brendan Rodgers, he did give a very interesting interview to Jamie Carragher. I don't know if you're a big fan of Carragher as a pundit. I don't mind him, if I'm being honest. But he did ask the question. He asked the question when he moved from Celtic to Leicester, because obviously Leicester are flying high. Brendan Rodgers is showing down there what he is capable of as a manager. This is a team that is leading to an FA Cup final. He's leading them into the Champions League. And, you watch from afar and you think back to what might have been. There was a big bit of criticism, obviously, when he left. A lot of Celtic fans were critical. And he said that it was his head ruling his heart when he left Celtic. What did you make of these comments? I know he's made a few comments over the piece since he left. Brendan, has the blow ever been softened for you on the Brendan Rodgers subject?
For me, it's just seen the season out. Mm-hmm. That was the thing. I think that's what kind of... See, if he'd left at the end of the season, I don't think there'd have been any criticism at all from Celtic fans. I think we all know that there was a lot of interfering going on, signing targets missed out, deals changed when Brendan thought they'd been sewn up for players that he'd identified. So we can understand why he wanted to leave, and I think we've had other managers wanted to leave for similar reasons in the past. So, yeah, I think it's when he left and the way he left, with the big game coming up against Hearts, away at Tynecastle, and Brendan just says, I'll just take everybody and walk out. It's not really the way to do it, is it? To see the season out. Or at least, if you don't take everyone, you allow some kind of people to stay on a bit longer and perhaps manage that game for you. But I just think walking out with everyone was part of the problem.
Did he try and take John Kennedy with him? Has that ever been confirmed?
I'm not, mate. There's a rumour of it, but it's not been confirmed. But
I just feel that, you know, Celtic as a club have been very loyal to John Kennedy. You know, and we're seeing him in a position which I don't think he can fulfil. I personally don't think that he's at that level, and he may go away somewhere else and develop as a manager and as a coach, Lawrence, and, you know, 5 years later we would maybe welcome him back. Who knows what might happen. But I don't think he's shown enough at Celtic to prove that he is worthy of that kind of standing. But the club have been particularly loyal to him. I mean, he's been part of the regimes under Ronnie Dyler, Brendan Rodgers, Neil Lennon, and now he's interim boss. And there's also rumours flying around, and the reason you brought up Brendan Rodgers, I'm just running with it, Lawrence. So there's rumours around the fact that, you know, he still rates him highly, wants him down at Leicester. Do you think that Rodgers will come up on a scouting mission to Celtic? Possibly for players such as Callum McGregor as well. Odsonne Edouard has been linked to Leicester. Do you still see some of our top players out with the three that we are expecting to leave to be targets of clubs like Leicester City?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think Rodgers, he knows the quality up here. I think there's like Armstrong, Van Dijk, Tierney have, I suppose, proven the quality within Celtic that can easily adapt to the Premiership. So clubs not looking up here, I think it would be foolish not to look up. So it's targeting, you know, who is it? Surely Christie's got to be in there, isn't he? You know, contract runs out fairly soon, so people could be looking to pick up a bargain. But yeah, I mean, Kennedy's a strange one. When Rodgers left, he was immediately appointed to assistant manager when we didn't have a manager, which was a bit bizarre. You know, how did you know the incoming manager was going to want him as assistant?
Yeah.
Who was making that? Well, I think it was probably Peter that made that decision, you know, and it was a strange one.
Let's go to some of the comments coming in on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, Lawrence, because part of the fun of the Axon Bulletin is getting everybody involved. That's what I enjoy, and we don't always have that opportunity. But David Bradley is joining us on YouTube, and if you're watching on YouTube, as I keep saying, make sure you subscribe. We are producing content on a daily basis. And David says, my man Desmond, still in a huff with the fans, get the finger out. I remember, you know, when Desmond came out with his very rare words, which I think appeared on the Celtic website. He was prompted to do that, I believe, through the criticism that had been levied at him by Brian Dempsey, former director of Celtic back in the 90s. And, you know, if one director gets him to react in such a way, Lawrence, I feel that, you know, the amount of calls for Celtic, not just, you know, Dermot Desmond, but Celtic as a club, to be far more engaging with their fan base. The amount of calls we've heard this season, you know, and for there to still be radio silence out of Celtic Park, I feel very let down as a Celtic supporter. And, you know, anyone who has had to watch the game on the virtual season pass, plus all the other extras you've had to pay out. You know, it gets to that point. We've made suggestions. We've invited Peter Lawwell onto this broadcast, and, you know, we've even said that why not address the fans before a game when every season ticket holder, certainly earlier in the season, would have been logging in. I'm not sure how many have stopped logging in. We certainly watch every single game, other than the Aberdeen game away, because we weren't prepared to pay another $12.99 for it, Lawrence. So, you know, at what stage can Celtic fans prompt someone like Dermot Desmond, someone like Peter Lawwell to actually come out? Dominic Mackay, would you expect some form of communication from him? Why not? I mean, there is a big event tomorrow night, and I think that this reminds me in part of what we did in December, Lawrence, where we were able to pull together 20 different Celtic podcasts for a charity event back in December. We hosted it on Axon, and it showed that the platform could be used to bring fan groups together. So tomorrow night there is going to be a large event, and I would implore everyone to get involved in the event. We are going to broadcast it on Axon. And we're going to have representation from Celtic Shared. We're going to have the Celtic Trust, but we're also going to have 6 other Celtic platforms who are going to come in banks of 3. There's going to be a discussion point there, Lawrence, but it is going to be a live and interactive discussion, so people can comment, people can ask questions around the Shares for Value initiative that's been set up in conjunction with Celtic Shared and the Celtic Trust. So that shows you how easy it is to actually pull people together using some technology, Lawrence, and talk and share ideas and communicate and debate. Why is the club not doing it?
It's a complete mystery. They don't seem to have any communication strategy at all. Even when they release something, they don't then seem to have a plan for the follow-up. Release some information, they don't think, well, how's this going to be received? What are we going to do? How will we follow up? You'd hope Mackay will address that. He's got a background in PR and communication, so you'd hope that's one of the weaknesses that Celtic have identified, and one of the reasons Mackay's got the job. He's particularly strong on that side of it. Just continually refusing to engage with fans seems to, it takes you back to kind of pre-Tommy Burns days, and then Burns, started, right, players need to attend the dances again. If we win the Cup, we're going to drive down Dunn Street, we're going to drive through Bortles down Dunn Street, after that and up to Celtic Park. The old route of the Cup winning teams start getting that fan engagement back, and it's the amount of goodwill that it generates is unbelievable. But you speak to Kev Grave and he said, cost you now to get a player along to your end of season dance or club event. What is that? I think McCann at the time had made it part of their contracts that they'd have to turn up. Seem to remember that, if you bought a certain level of shares, it was up to Cathcombray's Golf Club for a golf day with them. But just now it just seems absolutely nothing. No engagement other than restaurants open, shops open, come and spend your money.
Yeah, the big thing is, Lawrence, and we totally appreciate how much the game's changed. And back in the day, and we'll look back romantically at these ideas of players turning up for CSC's events, and Billy McNeil was big on that when he was a manager. And we appreciate that things and times have changed. But what we're talking about is, so has technology. So embrace the technology and use that as a means of engaging with the fan base during a season where basically we've just been kept in the dark, for long periods with no communication whatsoever, and any communication comes out and it's lacklustre and it's contrived, and it can't be challenged. Nobody's there, it's not interactive, it's a one-way communication, so it's ineffective in that respect, Lawrence. So we'll keep banging that drum, but I would say also as a caveat, going back to a point you made in relation to Dominic Mackay and the way that he approaches or has certainly approached in the past his positions is with a view on fan engagement, and we know that he has contacted Celtic supporters who have told us that Dominic Mackay has contacted them directly already before he was in position to speak to them and to engage with them, and I think that's really positive, and long may that continue. Lawrence, will you be joining us even as a commenter tomorrow night at the Celtic Shared Celtic Trust event?
Yes, more than likely, mate. More than likely. We'll talk about extra value and how can the club redress something that they owe the supporters base and the season ticket holders. And there seems to be the club have no idea. And it can't be that we'll do nothing. They need to come up with some proposal. So obviously Celtic Trust has come up with this proposal. Well, if that's not suitable, communicate it's not suitable and what you're going to do instead. Why aren't Celtic going to send a representative with a faulty IP again? He seems to be having to pick up a lot, doesn't he?
Well, I would suggest tomorrow night is an ideal opportunity, Lawrence, for a representative of the club to come into some kind of arena like this, whereby you don't just have a Celtic State of Mind. You're going to have an additional 6 platforms, so 7 in total, plus Celtic Shared, plus the Celtic Trust. Why not have someone from the club coming in and actually engaging with us as a number of groups, and not just with those who are appearing on the screen. Engage in the interactive comments, because someone can monitor them for the 1.5 hours that the show is going to be on and put some of the more challenging questions to the club. It's an ideal opportunity, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the club, we have an annual shareholders meeting to take questions from the shareholders. But where does the real value from the club come? It comes from supporters. So where's that annual event to take questions from supporters and ideas from supporters? Or monthly event, or a bi-monthly or 6 monthly, whatever it is. And I think the club really needs to look at that. If the value is your customer base, your supporters, how do you engage with them other than saying the shop's open and the restaurant's open? It can't be your only engagement. Why aren't you having focus group meetings with them, seeing how communication strategies work with them? Why aren't you having, in tandem with your shareholders meeting, having an annual open supporters meeting? And it's okay, kind of, we speak to the association, we speak to them. Listen, have an open forum, use technology like this. Have it open, transparent. People can watch it, even if they're not asking questions, and they get a greater feeling that they're being listened to.
Mm-hmm. See, the big thing as well that I've learned over the years, Lawrence, as most people that listen into a Celtic State of Mind will know, I'm not Glasgow based. I reside in Dunfermline by geographical default. That's where I stay. But as everybody knows, and I don't have to explain it to you, you don't choose your football team when it comes to Celtic, and I could probably have a whole podcast on the reasons that I support the club. However, when I look at the associations and the affiliations, I don't, I'm not part of any of that, because I, at this moment and for some time, aren't part of an actual supporters club. I have been a member of Celtic supporters clubs in the past. I've travelled with various buses over the years, going right back to the early 90s, on a bus that was called Ding's Bus from Oakley, and I've been on all these different buses, Lawrence, and members of Celtic supporters clubs. But if I'm not a member of a club, that means I'm not part of an association or an affiliation. It doesn't make me any less of a Celtic fan. So we need to really embrace the modern technology where we're able to bring groups together like tomorrow night. And this isn't just me going on a rant to promote tomorrow night's event, because it doesn't matter if you're part of a supporters club, it doesn't matter where you're based. And in many ways, for me, it doesn't even matter if you're a Celtic season ticket holder, because I've had loads of comments coming in about the fact that you're not entitled to make a point, or you're not entitled to be a contributor on a Celtic State of Mind if you're not a Celtic season ticket holder. I don't subscribe to any of that. You're a Celtic supporter, therefore you're entitled to air your views.
Yeah, I think so. Celtic doesn't belong to any one support in particular, does it? It's a group of people that support Celtic that make the club. So everyone's entitled to a view. You don't need to agree with them, but everyone's entitled to hold it as long as it's legal to hold. The more views, the merrier. Sometimes, perhaps give the clubs some ideas they could pick up on and say, what, that supporter's got a good idea. Why don't we implement that?
You think back.
I'm not talking about the Celtic View competitions or design the training.
I was just going to mention that, actually. You think back to the way that the club used to communicate, and the way that it has historically communicated with the fan base. Never before now has it been so easy to communicate with the fans. You think back to the days of the Celtic View, for example. You brought it up, Lawrence, 1965, Jack McGinn has this brainchild, which is the Celtic View. And to be honest, you've got to give him a great deal of credit for having the kind of foresight in terms of club media back then. It was a proper front runner. He was a bit of a trailblazer in that respect, and it still is the oldest weekly club magazine in world football. But even then, I mean, it was it was a bit like Pravda, as Not the View called it, about 30 years later, 20 years later. It was a bit like Pravda selling this kind of idea, and the only way you could communicate is by writing a letter and sending it in. And even then, 90% of the letters were written by staff members of Celtic, I think, with pseudonyms. But now we're beyond all that. We've got the technological advance to kind of call on and say, well, at a click of a button, let's talk. I mean, what do you think? We've obviously approached the club previously, Lawrence, and we were given a kind of holding response and then no response. At what point will we be there and say, well, we're not part of an affiliation or an association because we're not a member of a CSC. However, I'm a season ticket holder and I want to talk to someone at the club. Will it ever happen?
Should do. This stuff shouldn't be hard for them. You know what I mean? Listen, these are our customers. This is how we segregate them up. There's going to be a subset that are season book holders, not member associations and not member of a sports club. It's not hard to work out. How do we then communicate with them? And having a published communication strategy, it's not a bad idea for the club, is it? Saying, this is how we're going to communicate with people. We'll have weekly updates. We'll have whatever. this is when you'll get your chance to ask questions, or just come in and say, listen, we don't take questions from customers or supporters. If that's what you want to do, rather than, if that's what you want to be your strategy, let people know.
The big thing you mentioned there about a competition to design a new kit. I actually, if you want to dig through all your old copies of the Celtic View, I'm in it. One of my designs made it. It was a black and green effort for the new Celtic away jersey, so I'm in there. And that was way back in the early 90s, so probably about 92, 93. So I need to dig that out, or maybe not, because I think it was a horrific design with felt tip pens. But it got published, Lawrence. Now, Caplo Mark comes in, worryingly drawn out. Surely there is some agreement already in place, and it's legalities that are holding up announcing. And I think the point was made yesterday by Tony, that, he's given the club some form of trust that this is the case, and the things that are happening behind the scenes in relation to the movement. And some of the other comments coming in, David Bradley reckons that Celtic are too big for Eddie Howe, and I've seen that view quite a bit. I think that the thing that attracts me to Eddie Howe, Lawrence, is the fact that when you look at the job that he did at Bournemouth, the project, if you like, that was a long-term project. And, I think that people always go on about what about his time at Burnley, what about, the fact that he left him in relegation position in the league, etc. And I think that the Burnley situation, he's spoken about that. There's a few good interviews where he speaks about the reasons that he left Burnley, because people are taking it as read that he couldn't move away from Bournemouth, Lawrence. That's the only place where he's comfortable. A club like Celtic would be too big for him. But it came down to the fact that one of his parents died and he wanted to get back home, and there was personal issues around his move. So I don't know, David. I think that what we will certainly see about Eddie Howe is we will see him back in football very, very soon, Lawrence. And if it's not at Celtic, I think it will be a reasonable club down south at this moment in time. I think that one of the big selling points we have as a club, though, is that we can give him a much higher entry point. I think Brendan Rodgers is a prime example, Lawrence, right? So people might say, well, he came out at Liverpool, went back in as Leicester. But when he came out at Liverpool, he didn't win the league with Liverpool. He'd been out the game for about a year. And, to get back into the English division, which was his ambition, of course it was, he came to Celtic. So there are some similarities there. But I've said before, I think that if Eddie Howe goes back to English football right now, and you look at the level that he's going to enter that league at, a successful stint at Celtic is going to benefit him, surely.
You think so? Listen, the European Super League as well, people pull it out. I know Perez has said, the clubs are committed, they can't legally pull out. People have got to wonder what's going to be happening in top level football. Surely Celtic's going to give them more opportunity than a club at the bottom of the Premier League. Listen, if it's stalling, is it Eddie Howe? Why can't he announce anything? It's frustrating that Celtic just won't publish a timescale, won't let us know any communication.
It's the no communication. We're not expecting them to tell us exactly where they are in their negotiations with Eddie Howe. Of course we're not. In fact, they can't even tell us at this stage through the non-disclosure agreement I'm sure they've got with Eddie Howe that they're in discussions with him. But come out and talk to us about, on a general level, where we are in terms of getting a manager in. Yeah,
I mean, you've got to worry about Celtic. Their NDA should have been slanted for them. They're the ones doing the hiring, let's be honest. They should have been writing that NDA, but yeah, they should have put a time scale in front of us and said, look, and it should have come out probably within a week of Lenny leaving, going, this is what we're going to work to. This is the expectations set, because they must have sat down with a recruitment plan, or whoever's handling the hiring must have sat down and go, right, this is what we're looking to achieve. This is how long we think it'll take to get a shortlist. This will be interview negotiations. There's a time scale. There's when we'll expect to announce. And we'll give updates along the way, here, and here. And that'll keep the fans engaged and they'll feel as if, they're part of the club.
Exactly. Now, Lawrence, you would have expected that within a week. 62 days later, still no manager. 8 days into Dominic Mackay arriving at Celtic early, still no communication. We will continue to talk about this until the situation changes, but in the meantime, people will speculate. That is part and parcel of football. When we're doing a daily broadcast, we will always talk about the topical views. But a name that keeps coming back, and OB Boy says definitely not Jack Ross. Paul McLean says there's always Jack Ross. And, you know, when it comes down to other options that are available, there will be numerous options. I've spoken in the past about, you know what, we might even be in discussions with a manager that hasn't been mentioned in any of the press, Lawrence. You know, there may well be a rabbit coming out of a hat sometime soon. I was going to say big game this weekend. Well, it is a big game. Of course it's a big game. When we look at any Celtic Rangers game, Lawrence, and even though the league is gone and there's nothing more for Celtic to play for other than this professional pride that we've spoken about, I would add in a wee bit of needle and I would say let's put this invincible tag to bed once and for all, because, you know, yes, they're unbeaten in the league, they've been knocked out 2 cups, and what I would hope is that Celtic are able to use that as motivation. The fact that no one else beating them in the league. We had that magnificent invincible season in the first term under Brendan Rodgers, Lawrence. Let's put this chat to bed. Let's go out there and, you know, actually make sure it's not the first season in 20 years that we haven't beaten a Rangers side in an entire season when they've been in our league.
As you said, if you need an extra motivation, that's probably it. But then there's a question: why do you need the extra motivation? You know, I suppose it's Glasgow derby. You might have some of the players looking at the past few games and going, "Look, we've been a bit unlucky. We've had plenty of chances." So yeah, there's a few players there that you could say was a performance, but at the same time, perhaps John Kennedy's thinking of when I've played it safe, maybe it's time to change things up a bit and try something out. You know, does Sorrell come back in? Does he change the formation? I don't know. Does Eddie keep a place with it? You know, what's the point of keeping playing Eddie? It's getting to that stage, isn't it? Yeah, I know he's a great player and probably one of the most talented at the club, but he's certainly not doing it on the park.
I'm going to talk to you about Eddie and a few of the other areas that I think are going to be very interesting when we see the team lines out. Will it just go back to the norm, Lawrence, where it's very predictable as it had become, previous to Kennedy taking over, or will there be a few changes afoot? Because obviously, you know, it's not as though we've been, free scoring, rip roaring, never boring Celtic, to quote Anthony Haggerty. I'm going to go through some more of these points that are coming through. The Duda bides. Why do we care so much about a player coming out reading a script about how much he loves the fans? Now, I'm just picking up on this conversation, and I guess it's all around the kind of the official output that we get from the club. So if you were to look at the YouTube channel, for example, at the moment it's very much like pre-match press conference, post-match press conference, the angle behind the goal for any goals that Celtic score, and little else, Lawrence. It's all very laboured at the moment. There isn't much in the way of creativity in terms of the output, whereas we're also getting a comment coming in from Stevie Dock. Every week it's slagging the club. I don't know if you're talking about a Celtic State of Mind. This isn't slagging the club, Stevie. This is looking at the situation as it currently stands at the club and passing comment and having an opinion on it. It's not slagging the club. Should have done all this when winning trebles and quadruple trebles, or was the club okay then? Well, no, the club wasn't okay across the board, but when you're winning trebles, for example, I'll get back to you in a quadruple treble in a second, and I've said this many, many times, your success, Lawrence, masks a million deficiencies. But all you need to do, Stevie, we've been running the podcast for 4 years. Go back to some of the earlier episodes. The club were not beyond criticism back then. So whenever there's been anything going wrong at the club, we have criticised it, we have challenged it, and we'll continue to do it. It's going to be more prevalent when you look at the season we've had this season, Lawrence. I mean, we've been particularly poor on and off the park, and in particular with the engagement with the fan base. Under the circumstances, that should have been a lot better. As Celtic football fans, we are entitled to air those views. You can disagree with them, Stevie, but what I would say is, in relation to where we are in terms of the Celtic state of mind and where we were when we were winning trebles, we criticised the club where it was necessary. So was everything at the club okay then? No, it wasn't. But you've got to remember that when you're winning on the park, the focus is going to be far more on that. That's only natural. But we certainly didn't ignore anything that was going wrong at the club, Lawrence. And as I say, 4 years we've been doing a Celtic state of mind now. We've seen some great successes. Only in December, you joined me for the cup final against Hearts. We won a quadruple treble in December. 4 months later, and here we are, and that is why it's so difficult as Celtic fans to take. But you don't just take it lying down, you challenge it. You ask the question, how does this get better? A Celtic state of mind doesn't come on every day to slag the club. I'm sorry, that just is incorrect. That's not what we do. We come on and give balanced and reasoned arguments and debates around every aspect of the club, be that a victory, the women's team, what's happening with the board, their disengagement with the fan base. Every single nuance of Celtic Football Club is discussed on this broadcast, and it's not just about criticising the club, is it, Lawrence?
No, listen, definitely not, but you've got to pass comment and stuff, especially when the club appear to be continually getting it wrong and don't seem to be learning from it. Should no one, if it's don't criticise the club, but the club always above criticism, should we just be quiet and just, it doesn't matter what the way Celtics run, we'll be quiet. Because I seem to remember, the sack the board movement, save ourselves. Mm-hmm. Back going to games, what would have happened if we'd been quiet then?
Exactly. I mean, we've spoken to members of some of the earlier groups as well. Celts for Change and Save Ourselves. Save Ourselves were the precursor to Celts for Change. And we've spoken to various members of these groups, Lawrence, and, they were challenging a board that had it their own way. And it was a dynasty. It was a dynasty of families that, were at a stage with the football club where they couldn't progress the club. They could not meet the demands of the Taylor Report in terms of the stadium. They were not able to raise enough finance to challenge a financially rampant Rangers back then. We didn't have the ability to go out and get the kind of finance and match the signing policies that they had at that time. And we needed change, and that change started with a street movement, Lawrence. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So as Celtic supporters, you should actually wear that as a badge of honour. We're not criticising the club for the sake of it. We're criticising it because of the issues that the club have. It's unravelled really dramatically this season. We also speak to other people who and involved in other areas of the club. We spoke to David Lowe last week about exactly where we are as a football club and how we can move forward on that. And he touched on the Celtic shared situation that Celtic Trust are involved in, with David being the chairman of the Celtic Trust, of course. So no, it's as balanced as it possibly can be. And I think what happens is, one person says, I spoke to someone I know really well fairly recently, Lawrence, and he said to me, this is someone I've known for about 11 years, and he just said that Axom's like all the other podcasts, all we do is slag the club. I says, well, you've not listened to it then, because I'm not just going to take that criticism. Yeah, you're free to criticise, of course you are, but it doesn't mean to say you don't have a right to reply, Lawrence, especially when the criticism is inaccurate. So you're always going to have that right to reply. So I welcome everybody to get involved in the comment section, but it doesn't mean to say that I'm going to agree with everybody.
No, totally. If the club are doing something well, we're more than happy to point it out. Russell's on the Fran Alonso bus, he's driving it. I don't know if he's going to be in forfeit, for the game, but if they do something well, we cover it. If they do something badly, we're going to comment on it as well. You've got to.
I mean, and that's because you want the best for the club. It's not, a clickbait scenario, right? And this is another thing. Clickbait is, there is enough sites out there that create no original content whatsoever. They scour the internet for news sources, they reword them sometimes and put them on their own site, and they do that for ad revenue. And a lot of these people who have clickbait sites are making thousands and thousands of pounds every month by doing that. This is reasoned debate with, a panel of contributors, Lawrence, at the moment, which totals 13, which means you're not getting the same kind of echo chamber on a day-by-day basis. I used to present the show every single day. I had a concern that it might have been a mouthpiece for me if that continued, because I could potentially influence what people were thinking because I was on it every day. So I'm not on it every day, I'm on it twice a week. So it's as balanced as it can possibly be. We listen to all the feedback and we make the changes where required, but some of the criticism doesn't carry any weight, unfortunately. Michelle Sharon, if that's the way you pronounce your name, thanks for getting involved. Oakley, I remember lads from Oakley during the miners' strike. Staunch. Well, you might remember my dad, because he was involved in the miners' strike as well, and he still stays just down the road for Oakley. Good mining stock, Lawrence Connolly. We've been talking about the Rangers game. I'm looking at a couple of the options that we have. Some of the changes that, when John Kennedy took over, and the league hadn't officially been lost, but we all knew it was gone. We were never going to claw that back. And we were saying at that time, maybe we should assess players who are definitely going to be here next season, or there is a chance that they're going to be here next season. And the players that I was speaking about is, for example, Soro. So I said, why not play Soro? He came into the team against Lille in Europe, thrown in, performed really well, went on a really good run of form. Then he was unfortunate with illness and a wee bit of injury, and he's never really got back into the side. And at that point, Lawrence, and again, this is another thing about appearing on a Celtic State of Mind, you can't lie, because you can just watch it and see if I did say this. Play Soro. And I wanted Soro to be playing from Kennedy coming in to the end of the season. Give him the games, Lawrence. Help his development. Assess him for next season. And a couple of other guys that I mentioned at that time, was Barkas and Ayeti. Because, there's an investment there of 10 million quid. Have we already written that off? Because it seems as though we have, because they're not playing or starting games. There's news this morning around Barkas having interest from clubs in Greece. I'm not surprised that he does. He's an international goalkeeper with European experience. He's won the league in Greece. He'll get a return move to Greece. This season will be written off. He didn't settle in Scotland during COVID, and his career will continue. But what if there is a goalkeeper in there? We don't know. We actually don't know, because we haven't assessed them. After the pandemonium of the beginning of the season and how poor everything was going for us, we've not looked at Barkas, we've not looked at Ayeti, we haven't looked at Soro. Are any of these players, do you think, in John Kennedy's thoughts for a start at the weekend?
I don't think they are, which is different from whether they should be or not. I'm hoping James is fit to start, though, which would certainly change stuff. Let's be honest, we haven't had any width all season with Jamesy and Mikey being out, which leaves our fullbacks with a lot to do, which is probably why they look so poor, because they're not capable of doing that kind of Tierney role, doing all the attacking and all the defending on that side of the park. These guys just don't have the engine, or don't have the ability to do it. So, listen, I'm hoping that Jamesy starts. I'm hoping we see Soro, but I don't think John will change it. I think he'll play safe. And to be honest, I'm not too sure what benefit he's getting from playing safe. I just don't see what the payout is for him. He's getting in here really with nothing to lose, isn't he? If he goes in and tries something and it works, it's John Kennedy masterstroke. If he just plays the same stuff and it works, he's going, well, that's just the same way Lenny was playing it. So he'd still get any benefit from that. If he plays the same stuff and doesn't work, well, he didn't try anything, it didn't work. So the only thing that really raises his stock significantly if he goes in and tries something different and say, well, that was John Kennedy that tried that different and it's worked. I think if everything stays the same, it doesn't really raise Kennedy's profile or shows what he's capable of when he's in that manager position. But yeah, mate, I'd love to see Soro in again, but it's a strange one. Why is he's not been trying some of these players for longer? Remember when Dalglish came over as caretaker? Yeah, he bled a few of the young boys into the team. At least we got a look at them. You were able to assess them and go, you know what, not going to cut it. Listen, and some of the boys that have been in the club for a long while, at least they got a taste of it and could at least say, look, Celtic gave me a fair crack at a whip. I got a few games and I didn't do it. Which, when you look at recruitment policy within Scotland, young boys joining the club, we've already had Harper go back to MLS because can't really get a chance at Celtic. Can't really get a chance. So if we could see, the end-season games when the league's won, at least they're going to give players a chance then. At least I know I'm anyway getting a chance.
See the classic examples, Dembele. Now, I'm looking at the situation, the curious case of Karamoko. And, we've known all about this kid from a very, very young age. He's lived in this bubble, Lawrence, of trying to develop as a footballer whilst he's a household name almost among Celtic kind of circles. And, far, far younger than he probably should have done. We knew about him when he was 13 years of age. And that really isn't right. It's great to keep an eye on the youth development, but a lot of pressure on the kid. But he developed. He made his debut at 16. He made his European debut at 16. He's played for Scotland underaged, England underaged. He sat on the bench in the Scottish Cup final in the first game against Hearts, the second treble winning season. So you're looking at these situations. Sorry, that was the third. There's so many trebles you sometimes lose track. Aberdeen, Motherwell, Hearts and Hearts, right? It was the third one. But then his development hit a brick wall. Now, like everybody else, you hear all the kind of chat and the gossip and the fact that he was offered a loan deal that he didn't take. There was obviously an issue in relation to his relationship with Neil Lennon because he basically didn't play. He just didn't play. So his development has hit a brick wall this season. But we've been crying out for a bit of width on the right-hand side, particularly on the right-hand side because James Forrest has had a long-term injury. And only against Aberdeen last midweek did he get a wee chance to go in and show us what he can do. And then you look at that and you think, well, he actually performed pretty well when he came on, Lawrence. Where's that been all season? Give these guys a chance.
Yeah, I mean, especially kind of getting the white players on, it changes the park for us, doesn't it? It lets the other players perform better as well, creates more space for us. But it's a complete mystery. Why? Well, as you touched on, there's rumours about his relationship with Lenny and why that's happened. But surely both parties had to go over that. We were struggling for width. We didn't have options.
Yeah.
He's an option. Would it have been that bad to give him 10, 15 minutes? See what he can do towards the end of the game? When the government decided it wasn't 3 players, it was 13, we were out without because of COVID. Mm-hmm. Why was he not back into the full time? It's a mystery.
That's a big one for me, though, Lawrence. When that decision was made and we had to play so many younger players, we had the games against Hibs and Livingston, which we covered on Axom. Some of those players weren't ready. And that's a sad indictment as well of the way that we have been developing players, because we should have been given some of that game time. And you look at the 9 in a row era of absolute domination domestically, and we should have been identifying games where we were able to develop some of these players. And I think it was never more evident than in those 2 games following the Dubai fiasco that we do not have players who are first team ready. We should have a lot more players who are first team ready. Dembele being a prime example, have we lost him? I'd love to see a manager coming in and resurrecting his Celtic career, because it wasn't that long ago that he was one of the ones to watch. And I'm talking European football lists, Lawrence, all over the world they're talking about Dembele, and there's a potential that he'll end up leaving us for now.
Yeah, we lost some of a better players to Bayern. But I think it probably goes back to, what's our targets? We've talked about this, we can come in. Perhaps it was easier for him to say, this is my 5-year targets. I'm going to build a 60,000 seat stadium. I'm going to put the club in a good financial footing. You're going to be competing again at the top of Scottish football. Well, what are the club's targets? I think then it's come out and said, it's just to improve on last year. Well, it's right, how are we going to measure that? Do we actually go down and go, well, we're wanting homegrown players 4 to get at least so many minutes between them in a season? Do we have anything like that? Because if we don't, if we're not aiming for it, it's probably a good reason why we're not hitting for it. Whereas if you're 3-0 up, I think I got a bit of criticism in the Motherwell game when I was saying, look, get Sorrow on now. 3-0 up away Motherwell, don't go push for another goal. We're going to need to see what backup players can do. And at 3-0, that's kind of, or you're 3 up, it's a good chance to put younger players or players that are your second string and see what you can do. But Celtic don't seem to have been doing that for some time now. And is it a lack of targets that we're giving to managers? Well, part of their desire is to run a great youth programme. That's to produce players for the first team. And we know there's that gap, there's no reserve. Look, well, what are we going to say to the manager? Look, we're looking for you to get so many youth team players or homegrown players so many minutes. Or do we just say, look, we're going to have all these youth players, but they're not actually targeted with getting them into the team. Just use them if you want, or don't use them. Doesn't really matter.
It's a frustration for me because the best example of being given the opportunity to bleed them in has been the 9 years previous to this season, Lawrence, whereby there were many games that once the games are won or you've won the league with X amount of games to spare, you start giving these guys minutes. I mean, Stephen Welsh, I'm a big fan of Welsh, and I've spoken about that time and time again on Axom, but I don't think when he was thrown in he was ready for it. I actually don't I think he's played his way into the team and he's got stronger as the season's gone on, but by the time he was thrown in against Rangers at the beginning of the season, Lawrence, he should have had more game times in his legs, and you know that for me was a prime example of it.
Definitely. I think his first game could have probably adrenaline gone through. That's 2 or 3 games. He was a wee bit off it. I think it's adjusting to the pace of first team football. He was just a bit rabbit in the headlights at the time. You know, he's caught out of position a couple of times. So, you know, you're never going to experience it unless you experience it. And you've touched on it yet. But the league's won. Let's put the players in. Look at KT when he came in under Ronnie. You know, he wasn't started the unders teams, but he got his chance. And he grabbed it with both hands.
Yeah.
There could have been other players in that situation that we don't know about. And unless we've got some kind of development plan for them, instruction for them, listen, if that league's won, step up the amount of minutes these guys are getting on the park. Or, you know, in games when you're 3 goals to the good, now you need to be looking to get some of the younger boys on and see what they've got, see what they've got about them.
Yeah, you're right. And again, people go on about the Kieran Tierney situation and sometimes refer to Andy Robertson. I think the one that frightens me a wee bit is how close we came to actually losing Callum McGregor. You know, McGregor was given his debut at 21 from Ronnie Dyler. By that time, he had spent some time at Notts County. During that period, Celtic got a bid from Carlisle. We were almost ready to sell him. Ronnie Dyler comes in, resurrects his Celtic career. And I'm kind of hoping that, you know, Dembele's career at Celtic isn't over yet. I hope that a new manager can come in and revitalise some players like Dembele. I'd love it to happen with Ayer, you know, but I'm almost resigned to the fact that he'll leave. I don't hide my admiration for Big Chris Ayer on the podcast, even though many people disagree with me. But bringing in some more of the comments, John Paul Connors, club has no control over fan media. That's why they won't engage. That's potential. There's potential truth in that. I think that had they engaged a wee bit earlier, then, you know, it would have been much easier now to, you know, continue with that engagement because they've already opened it up. I mean, there were so many different things that could have been done in the past, Lawrence, you know, getting the engagement from some of the brilliant platforms that are out there.
If you want to talk about kind of control on the media, I suppose it comes down to a media plan and strategy. You can open it up to fan media as long as you brief the guys that are going on it and go, look, this is what's likely to come up and these are the scenarios. And this is the way we want it to be done. But it seems that Celtic don't have any of that kind of planning unless it's the marketing strategy. You know, they definitely don't have a kind of fan communication strategy. They could control a conversation with fan media, I'm sure. You know, they've got some well-paid PR executives at the club that should be able to do that. But they don't even seem to want to take that risk, which is crazy. Like, you know, let's be honest, you know, fan media is largely amateur. These guys are professionals at this. It should be meat and drink for them to come on and control a conversation, or control a dialogue and get a message across.
See, the big thing for me, it could be something really simple. We interviewed back in the days where we were doing our podcast from the toll booth studio in Stirling. Lawrence, we interviewed a staff member at Celtic who works for the media team. And afterwards, I just basically asked, what can you do? What can you do to get us involved in some form, shape or form? And he offered, why don't you come in on match day and bring your camera and follow us around and it's like a fly in the wall. And I thought, aye, brilliant, we'll do that. And, you know, it just never happened, even though we followed it up. So there was a lot of things we could have done. I always thought it would have been good alternative commentary. Imagine having an alternative commentary, but you're actually vetting the people who are on it, because you're bringing on someone who already has a platform, and then one week you have one of these Celtic podcasts. I think, because you're going to bring a different perspective to the table. But there would need to be guidelines. Of course there would. And although they can't control you, if you were going to appear on their channel, there would need to be a level of that, especially if it was live, Lawrence, because you see some of the things that comes in when we're live. And by the way, I'm not here to deliberately disagree with anyone, but when it comes to criticism, I think it's fair to respond to that. And, this hasn't been basically a platform for everybody to come on and just moan and be negative for the sake of it. When we look at the Rangers game, I'm going to throw a couple of options at you then, Lawrence. You tell me what you think we should go for, not what you think is going to happen. Will Barkas make an appearance?
Don't think he will. Well, I'll go with Barkas or Hazard. Probably I'll go with Hazard. I think... we've got to kind of show some faith in our youth development. Hazard, he's shown he can be a wee bit weak at cross balls, but he was the hero of the cup final, saving penalties, good shot stopper. He's got to wonder what he's really done wrong to be out the team. But for me, I don't see Bain as the long-term Celtic number one. I don't know if Bain would be happy staying on as number two next season. And I don't know what benefit it would be to Celtic at some point. We've got Hazard who's come in done reasonably well. You've got Gary Hayes' grandson, Angelini. He's got to be looking at a pathway. He's got to be looking, well, there's Connor above me. He went in and done well. He's not in the picture anymore. The
last I heard about Angelini was he was on his way to Brighton. Talk about a pathway. There's another young, talented player, Lawrence. But thanks for your comment, John Paul Connors. Another couple of potentials, which actually I'm not expecting to happen. Centre forward, I keep hearing how Eddie turns up for the big games. Eddie has barely turned up this season. I mean, let's be honest about it, right? So up front, do you give Griff or Ajeti a start, do you think?
I'd start Griff and Ajeti, mate.
You play the two of them?
Oh,
yeah.
Bench
Eddie?
Bench Eddie, yeah.
Bench French Eddie?
Yeah, see how he likes it, mate. Yeah, and it might be an inspired substitution late in the game, but, maybe it's too late for a wake-up call for us, but... get Griff on, who's got 3 days in his contract left for Celtic to activate the 12-month option we've got. Who will make that decision? Who knows? But I would start the two up. Yeah.
Now that's a question I'm going to ask you. The final one about the lineup is all around the fullbacks. I always remember that kind of joke. Again, I'm going to name check the Not The View because I loved the fanzine back in the day. I was a subscriber for years, and the big question was, is he a left back? And then I remember then people using that many years later when we were struggling for a left back. Is he a left back? Every time we were linked to anybody. Look at some of the fullbacks that have left us recently, right? So we've just heard that yet another player in Manny Pires has signed for Portland Timbers, and he's instantly been loaned out to Austin FC. Ilhamid, of course, is already away. Hapoel Beersheva. Frimpong's away to Bayer Leverkusen. Andrew Gutman's away to Atlanta United. And you look at the situation at the fullbacks, Lawrence, none more so was it clear to me that our fullbacks just aren't good enough than the Rangers game where they beat us 2-0. Like Salt and Kenny, loan deals, quite happy if they get sent back. Who starts against Rangers?
Yeah, I would start Taylor. I would start Diego getting a Celtic shirt after some of his antics and the effort he was putting in the last Rangers game. I would probably go beating Welsh in the centre and Ayer at right back for me.
You've been advocating Ayer at right back for a long time. But going back to that, transfer business still happening. Obviously, Klamala, which is one of the stories on the Celtic website as well. We've sold Klamala. That's how. So the deals are still taking place. In an ideal world, the new income manager would have some kind of overview or saying it, but it doesn't seem as though we're at that stage with the manager now. Lawrence, I've said this a few times. It's a Celtic podcast, but we do get fans from other clubs coming in to make comments. Now, I remember, how sometimes when you're on YouTube and you get linked into another video and before you know it, you're watching a conspiracy documentary about Paul McCartney dying in the 1960s. I watched this documentary and it was about the Mandela Effect. Now, somebody earlier on in the comments mentioned Nelson Mandela. Are you familiar with the Mandela Effect, Lawrence?
Explain it to me. I remember Glasgow named Nelson Mandela Place after him, which had the South African embassy on it.
Yeah.
Now, I remember that.
The interesting thing about the Mandela Effect, right, and there is a relevance to this. I'll get to the relevance in a moment, and it's all about fans of other clubs coming to join us. The Mandela Effect, right, is that there's all these people. They reckon it's either false memories, right, or there's been a wee glitch in the matrix, and some conspiracists actually believe that it's humans travelling from the future to change events, and that's why some people remember Nelson Mandela dying when he was in prison, and we all know that that didn't happen. We all remember him being freed, etc., etc. And there was a few other examples of this, Lawrence. So they reckon that the lyrics to the Queen songs, "We Are the Champions of the World," it doesn't actually say "of the world," but people remember it as that. And then there's logos that people remember as being a certain logo, but it wasn't that. So people have differing memories of songs and events, etc. And I think that when we get this kind of message, I wonder if this is a Mandela effect, because people seem to have forgotten the death of a club in Scottish football, Lawrence. And I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can, that these false memories are basically just a glitch in the matrix.
Mate, I don't think it's false memories. People will season anything that backs up their beliefs. So, and if it misconstrues it, they'll twist it just to back up the belief. So, and I think everyone does it. I think if you look at Johnson and Trump supporters, it's what they do. They seize on the things that back their beliefs and just block out the things that don't back their beliefs. They didn't happen, mate. It doesn't suit me, my beliefs, so it didn't happen. It's... I think everyone knows they died. The definition of a club was pretty straightforward under SFA articles and under UEFA articles. The club and the owner operator were the same thing. But it's an association of football clubs. It's not an association of companies that own and run football clubs. There was kind of no debate about it, mate. I suppose that's why there was the big... show liquidation, the red card.
But there's so many people remember them as being the same, one and the same, and this event didn't happen, Lawrence. And I'm putting it down to the Mandela effect. I think the truth has to come out eventually. This is all down to future. This is humans travelling from the future, isn't it? That's more believable than some of the nonsense I'm hearing here.
They remember it. They remember it happened. They remember marching, to Hampden to put a petition through a door that didn't have a letterbox. They remember all of that. They just chose to block it out. It's just a bit painful, a bit raw for them. Listen, there's no shame in the club dying because they were cheating Her Majesty's tax revenues. And if we're to believe Hugh Adam, it was back to the late 80s, early 90s. Former director of Rangers came out and said they'd been cheating since that time. And obviously, the SFA took no action when Adams made that statement. And perhaps if they had, they might have stopped it going so far.
John Paul, we're having a wee bit of fun. It's fine. It's fine. Celtic have been absolutely atrocious this season, and whoever wins the league, it's on Celtic. That's absolutely... during the season, though, when people were getting so hung up about Castori gear and all that, Lawrence, I wasn't interested in that because, you just keep your own backyard in order, and we didn't do that this season,
Yeah, definitely poor, but talk about winning leagues. The women's are away to Forfar. 5 points off the pace. They're away to Forfar. They're still in with a chance there. So, big game for them.
The big thing for me, last point, and I'm glad you brought it up, the women's football. Axom are kind of new to the game. We've got some tremendous female presenters and contributors, and we've covered a couple of games now, Lawrence. You've been involved in that. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've said before, my favourite player is Sarah Tiergarden. I think she's absolutely tremendous as a player.
Yep.
And we figured out that there's a link to John Harkes, who almost signed for Celtic in the 1990s. But the big thing I'm thinking of, if Celtic women's finish second in the league this season, they're in the Champions League. Now, how tremendous would it be next season when we're back in the grounds, if the home legs of the Champions League for the women's team were played at Celtic Park, Lawrence? I think that would be brilliant.
Mate, got to be done. If nothing else, we'd get to use the disco lights twice as much as we'd planned. I think, part of having Brendan's Deso pitch is that it can handle, a higher number of games. We saw it kind of K Park at the weekend. Surface wasn't so good for them. Don't know why it hadn't been watered before before the game against Hibs, it was really sticky. Compare that against kind of the Glasgow Derby when they were playing at Paradise, mate. It was definitely a lot better for Celtic to play on that natural grass surface.
Well, if we do get the disco lights, I also want Russell to wear that white blazer. I might get one myself because my last jacket was slagged off for coming from Matalan, let's be honest.
Mate, if we get the disco lights out, Russell might even get invited to do the alternative commentary and interview Fran Alonso after it.
Hey, that's the thing dreams are made of. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks everybody for the comments. We're having a bit of fun there. We're actually laughing at ourselves. Celtic fans have always been good at self-deprecating humour. Lawrence Connolly, and that's not going to change on the AXOM. Thanks everybody for getting involved in Twitter, Facebook and YouTube discussions. All your comments are welcome. And thank you very much once again, Lawrence Connolly, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.